is Hey Heart 143 with Natalie Tavidian. 143 means I love you. Together, we're learning to love ourselves and stay in love no matter what life throws at us. We are constantly evolving, changing, growing emotionally, spiritually, and physically. And we have to remember to check in with our own heart as we're propelled forward. When you love your own heart, you heal better, you do better, and you live a more fulfilled life. Welcome to Hey Heart 143, everyone. I have a very special guest with me today. Her name is Francine Ong. Francine is a psychic medium and a healer. She's based in Pasadena, and I've personally seen her several times for Reiki, so I kind of want to call you my personal Reiki. Welcome, Francine. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm super excited to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's always kind of fun to get to do these kind of recordings because it's definitely an opportunity to even just to talk about and to share about all the things that's going on nowadays, lately.
Yeah, and I think what I love about seeing you every time is whatever I'm feeling, you always end up talking about what's going on with the collective experience as well. And I think it's something a lot of people don't realize is that we are all in this together, and whatever's ever going on in the collective, like we're feeling that. We're feeling that down to our core. Can you talk a little bit more about what you do?
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up predominantly in a Buddhist family, traditional faith. My parents were very devoted Buddhist. It was also a cultural thing because I grew up in this country. So being Buddhist also kind of made us sort of kind of still connection to my own Chinese background. My parents were very devoted Buddhist. We went to temples every weekend. I went to the Sunday school equivalent of a Buddhist school. So traditional faith has always been a part of my upbringing. And when I was 16 years old, my own family was experiencing its own crises. So I went even more deeper at that point, at that time, to really try to navigate this whole evolution, the spirituality aspect of this human existence. So well into my 20s, I traveled to many different countries, spent a lot of years actually overseas, predominantly in Asia. And I studied with many different Buddhist temple teachers, masters, mostly Tibetan. I did a lot of Tibetan Buddhist training in Tibet. I was there for about a year. So a lot of that really plays into my background. When I returned to this country, I was fascinated to see the Western integration of all these Eastern traditions. So that was really where my fascination came from. But that slowly evolved. Like everything else, everything doesn't stay the same. It all sorts of kind of move with the need and the want of the individual. And then I slowly developed certain abilities to do healing, energy work, a lot of psychic readings, a lot of spiritual readings, and mediumship readings. So last few years, that's what I've been doing. I've been seeing clients for energy healing, a lot of uplifting, hopefully, uplifting, and a lot of soul searching for many folks. So I have a small little practice in Pasadena where I see individual clients, and I also have group classes as well.
So how long have you been doing the one-on-one healing work? You've kind of been honing in on your skills since your teens.
Yes, so the one-on-one healing really came into play about 10 years ago. I was doing a lot of healing work with my family and friends, more intimate individual people who actually would come forth with the need for any sort of healing. And I think healing takes place when people say healing, it's such a vague term. It's like, what do you really mean by healing, right? So and healing's always been for me on so many different levels: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. So it's all integrated into this whole being, this whole evolution of ourselves, who we are. So well, one-on-one really kind of extended from the individual families and friends. I was saying they started slowly referring their friends and their own family coming to see me. And next thing I know, I had a practice. I started to see people more often than not. So I realized what spirit was really leading me and spirit was really guiding me. And so about 10 years ago, I started seeing really individual clients one-on-one.
Well, I love the work that you do, and I love seeing you for Reiki. You've definitely helped me get that little bit of boost when I've needed in certain moments of my life. So I
Thank
love the
you.
work that you do.
Oh,
One of the things that we were talking about, I saw you back in January. I think it was a couple days after Kobe Bryant's death. And
yes.
I remember we had a conversation about his death, and I said, "Isn't this so heartbreaking, but so amazing how so many people all over the world were feeling this pain?" And that's when I started thinking about this collective energy and this collective experience. And I don't know if I'm going to word this right, but it only got worse with the pandemic and that
Sure.
collective experience.
Yes.
Um, talk about that. Talk about that. I think you even said like this whole collective experience is sort of a theme for 2020.
So 2020, yes, so I did see you. I think that right after the New Year's, I believe right after the New Year's, and in fact, right. So I celebrate 2 New Years, and I'm sure a lot of people out there celebrate 2 New Years too. So I celebrate the Chinese New Year's, and the Chinese New Year's was in late January, and I think I saw you just around that time.
Yeah.
And this year is the year of the rat. The cycle of the year of the rat for the Chinese astrology, and it's the metal rat. And it was really interesting. It started off with Kobe's death. And Kobe's death really also affected me on a very personal level because my family was a Lakers fan since the 1980s, 1970s and the 80s, and carry on to today. So, I got to really talk to a lot of people. It was really personal, partly how personal. And I'm sure Kobe would be surprised to even see how he personally have touched so many people. I think he would really feel really surprised by it. But on this collective connection, on this metal year of the rat, it's all about new beginnings. It's all about resetting and dissolving what didn't work before and having all that kind of crumble and fall apart and resetting a new system. And that's what the collective is all about, because we are not independent. There is nothing independent about in this world. Everything is codependent on one or the other. Everything has a cause and effect to it. Whatever I do, it's going to affect certain things, or whatever I say is going to affect certain people or certain situation. And then that's a dominoes effect. It's like a ripple effect. So if we understand that dynamics, then we will understand the collective connection that we all have with each other. And how, for example, like you brought up Kobe's death, how that affected every single person, even people who are not basketball fans, was affected by his death. And then obviously
family and what they're going through. I mean, whether you're basketball or not, it was such a heartbreaking time.
Absolutely. Mothers who have young children, or, grandmothers who have grandchildren are starting to think about it. It's all affecting people all in different ways. And then slowly moving to the pandemic. As we know, it slowly sort of kind of evolved into March. And that's when it sort of kind of everything is kind of falling into a place where we all have to start to realize was this pandemic is leading us. And what's interesting is that what happens when you keep doing something. It's like Albert Einstein always says, what's insanity? Insanity is keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting the same different results, right? So if something is not working, and culturally and collectively we keep doing the same thing over and over again, something needs to happen in order to break that cycle. something has to happen in order to give you a different results at the end of the day. And that's where this whole collective evolution is for the last 6 to 8 months of this pandemic, once we went into this pandemic mode. And that's what's going on, is that things that didn't really quite been working out, we thought it's working out, we think it's working. It's a very complicated, interconnected web. And so this is a way of resetting, hitting the reset button and recognizing, well, guess what? It's not really working out. And we have to reevaluate everything that's been going on in our society, in our world, in our own personal lives, and leading to the changes that are required.
I think it's so interesting that you said in March, that's when things started falling together, when if you look at deep down inside, it just feels like everything's being shaken up, falling apart. But it also feels like someone's holding me and like saying, or not me, but, holding us and saying, snap out of it. Like, things need to change. And what I've noticed a lot is people moving around. So many people are moving their homes, or people in my inner circle. Like, I have relatives that just moved here from the East Coast. Hey, we've always wanted to do this. What better time than now? We're working from home.
Yeah.
I'm sensing that kind of energy too, is like just everyone just sort of like scattering and moving and finding, like falling into place, like how you described it.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's really important that we also look on this level of a microscopic level, because what's happening in the world, and then what's happening in the country, and then what's happening in your family, and then what's happening to you personally as an individual, all is quite connected. Whatever that's happening in our society, reevaluation system, reevaluating our value system, what's important to us, what's not working, the old guard. And then it comes to the microscopic. Like you said, people are moving homes, people are quitting jobs that didn't work out for them, that's been making them ill all these years, and finally they take the plunge to leave the job. Or even relationships. They've been in relationships that was not working for them, but then for whatever reason, they will hang on to it. And now here's an opportunity. Microscopically, a lot of people have started to break out. So when I say fall into place, yes, you're right. It's sort of kind of shaking everything up, but in reality, it's making the room sort of more open for you to take that plunge, to take that opportunity to release what you really that doesn't serve you any longer, and give you room to receive what really truly is meant for you. I mean, all that is really scary, nonetheless, not to say that it's easy to leave a relationship or to find a new job, but just like Mother Nature, this is Mother Earth telling us, hey, I've given you plenty of time to reevaluate this whole system, but here's an opportunity now. This is a good time to really give the opportunity to really refresh and recalibrate.
Dealing with that feeling of fear, what kind of advice do you have for people dealing with that? Because it is a lot to shake things up, and like you said, it's so important to change the way we do things if we're unhappy. So in a sense, the pandemic has forced people to change the way they do things if they're unhappy. So I mean, I could sit here and say there's so much good that came out of it, and of course so much scary things and so much heartbreak that is coming out of it. I'm talking like it's over. It's not over. What's
No, it's far from being over. It's a lot of work ahead of us. Moving into the next year, I'll talk a little bit about what's coming up in the next year. But
please.
Yeah. So yes, fear is a very good motivation from keeping us from really doing what we need to do to recalibrate ourselves. And fear-based emotions is part of our DNA. We first have to accept it's just part of who we are. It's embedded into our DNA. It's embedded into Homo sapiens of flight and fight or freeze. It's part of our brain system to tell us what we should do or not do to self-protect. So we first have to accept that it's very much part of us. Nothing wrong with being frightful. Nothing wrong with having fear, because it is self-preservation. It is where we know when we need to self-protect. But what happens is, just like our brain, we have this frontal cortex that is protecting us, telling us when we are supposed to fight or flight. Sometimes this frontal cortex gets stuck. It forgets what it needs to do. And so we're left out in that limbo state of like, oh no, freaking out. Because what happens is, if you really take the time to really think about fear-based emotions, you will recognize that you've been there before. It's like, oh, Francine, I've been there. I can do this. I know this emotions. I know this feeling. I got this because I've been there. But what happens is, when we get really stuck in that motion of like not being able to rationalize our fear-based emotions, that's when you get freaked out and says, all hell breaks loose, right? You just decide that fear is the only thing that you're feeling. You forgot all the reasonable tools that you have built all these years to help you to handle what's in front of you. So first of all, you got to recognize that you have the tools. You have to recognize that you have tools to deal with fear, to conquer fear, that you have the ability to do so, because we wouldn't have survived for millions of years without knowing that that's our power. So yes, fear is it's part of who we are, but at the same time, we also have the tools to conquer the fear and to work with it. And then secondly, we have to also recognize what is rational fear-based and irrational, right? So I always like to take the example of the bees. We know bees are such a wonderful creature of our environment. But at the same time, we grew up with this fear of bees. We've always been taught about, bees being stung. If you're allergic to it, it hurts, it's painful. As a child, we've always been taught to stay away from bees. So if you really think about it, the bees have no interest in stinging us. That's the last thing on their minds, right? They're just looking for that flower to pollinate. So that's the last thing they want to do, because they die, right? So in some crazy way, we become fearful of something that they're actually fearful of us. So when you're walking, you're walking by, some plant, and you hear the bees, the very first thing you come in emotions is like, oh no, there's these bees around. I'm going to get stung. I'm going to get hurt. It's going to be painful. I'm going to be in pain. And then you think about it, and it's like, the bee's just doing its own thing. I'm not interfering. I'm not going to try to hurt it. He's not going to try to hurt me. So that irrational fear of bees will slowly subside, and then you no longer fear it at that moment. So it's really important to practically reason with yourself what's rational and what's irrational fear. Okay. So I always, when my clients come to me and they tell me they feel like they're stuck in the situation, they're fearful to move forward. So we have to first understand what is the frontal cortex doing, right? What is it really getting stuck on? Is it getting stuck on the idea of that you are actually worthy of this thing that you've been working with? Or are you stuck on this, like, well, give me some practical know-how, these are the steps that I need to take to get this accomplished? So it really varies on the situations and what they're trying to resolve.
A lot of times I would imagine it's like times like this, it's fear of the future. What's going to happen? It's the unknown. It's that humans want to know, right?
Yes. So that is unfortunately one of those things that we are constantly fighting on, staying present, right? Because we're either in the past trying to think, trying to remember what happened, what we did, and then we're trying to figure out what's going to happen in the future. Many of us find it very difficult to stay at this moment, this present moment, at this present time, this very minute, this very hour, this very evening, right? So I think the future is, and it's now, it's when you recognize what you're doing now is already affecting your future. Some very simple way, if you really think about it, you walk into a restaurant, you take a seat, and you ask the waiter, can I have a glass of water? And you are projecting that future. You are already projecting that future with your voice. Can I have a glass of water? And 2 minutes later, your waiter brings you a glass of water. That's already projecting a future. So if you really think about it, you're always projecting and creating that future every moment of the present time that you're in. So I always say, don't try to, overthink this and trying to get to the future. Go small, 2 minutes from now, 4 minutes from now, 10 minutes from now, 30 minutes from now, an hour from now. That's all in the future. If you're thinking, because most people are thinking, well, what I'm going to be doing next year? Would I get married in 6 months' time? Well, are you on the path, right? What are you doing about it in about an hour? What are you doing about it in 2 hours or a month or 3 months? So if you start setting those goals in those little minute steps, that is creating the future. But you got to do it in the present.
I think that's something that I work on a lot is that being present. And I think this is the perfect way to segue into breathing and breath work. And I recently did one of your online circles where we were doing breath work, and it was great for me. And for me, that helps me stay present. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of breathing and breath work? And it's just, that has been such a huge part of my healing journey. So I like to talk about it as much as I can,
Yes.
learn more about it.
Absolutely. So one of the modalities that I do practice is breath work, and I do work with clients, individual clients, with their breath. And the breath work there's so many different types of breath work out there. If you Google nowadays, everybody's doing some sort of breath work. And it's so critical nowadays, partly because of the pandemic, if you really think about it, because it's affecting our lungs, right? This pandemic, this virus is affecting our lungs. It's affecting the way we breathe. And people who have the virus are struggling with breath. And the lungs in Chinese medicine represents grief. The energy of the lungs represents grief. So this is all about releasing grief. This is the collective releasing grief. This is where the world, Mother Earth, Mother Nature, the universe is helping us to release the grief that is built up within our lungs. That's the energy of this organ. And the lungs is also one of the biggest organ in our body, the last organ to form as a child when they're in the mother's womb. So when they're premature, the most difficult thing for a premature baby to do is breathe because their lungs are not fully formed. So breath work is critical before and even more so now during this pandemic. So the breath work, there's many different ways of doing breath work, and I've been trained in many different ways, many different types of breath work. We got the 3-part breath, which is the healing breath work that I believe you've been done training in as well. So I got that certification a few years ago as well. And I do a lot because I'm also a yoga instructor. So a lot of pranayama training as well, part of the yoga instruction. And the breath work is critical because most of us, if you really think about it, don't really breathe properly. Yeah, a lot of us are reverse breathers, and that's why they feel really exhausted in any sort of physical movements. Certain people have very shallow breath. Certain people have very deep breath. Some people breathe too much. There's actually there is a situation when one can breathe too much, because it's a very interesting balance between carbon monoxide and oxygen, because you need both. We've always been taught that, we want to get rid of the CO2, but in reality is those two chemical has to be balanced within ourselves in order to breathe properly. So very quickly, breath work is also a modality to help them to release from this physical attachment. So I'm sure with you, sometimes you may feel that you would get some sort of ethereal experiences when you're doing breath work. And so that's also a way to help you heal on the ethereal level, because some of the work can't not be done in this physical form. Some of the healing work needs to be done on an energetic level. And so breath work actually takes you out of this physical body and takes you up into the ethereal level, I would say, the realm, energetic realm, and heal in that atmosphere. So, yeah.
Every time I never know what to expect, but most of the times I cry or I release something.
Yes, like I said, healing takes on, physical form. You got physical ailments, so healing takes on that. Mental anguish, frustration, mental mindfulness, people who are very easily distracted. Breath work helps them to kind of collect themselves, being present, being aware of the breath, and also healing on the emotional level. And that's where your emotions, the crying, the release. So the breath work takes you out of that very self-aware, because when you're self-aware, you tend to contain your emotions. So once you release that judgment of being self-aware, then you can release the emotions. And of course, breath work will also connect you to spiritual healing as well.
What are some tips you have for people to breathe correctly, or is it to be conscious of our breath, because it's something that most of us aren't conscious of?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's the easiest thing to start off with. I don't like, well, I shouldn't say I don't like. Techniques are great. Breathwork techniques are great, and you can always learn techniques, and you can always teach techniques. But sometimes I find that a lot of people, when they get techniques, it gets into their head. And the next thing they know, they start thinking about the technique instead of the breath. So I think you should start off with just being conscious about the breath, becoming aware of the breath, whether the breath is shallow or deep, whether there's temperature or texture to it. Where do you hold your breath when you stop breathing? Because we all do that. I know some people are like, oh, how can we?
Was I just not breathing for?
Yeah, exactly. I know, right? Sometimes we just don't breathe for 20 seconds or 10 seconds, Yeah, so, where do you hold your breath? When you don't breathe, where do you feel it? Do you feel it in your chest? Do you feel it in your throat? Do you feel it in your back? Do you feel it in your hips? Because all that matters. And if you do feel well breathing, it's like, how does that make you feel? What were you doing when you feel like your breath is so smooth? Is it walks you're taking in nature, or having a piece of chocolate, or talking to somebody you love, or having an intimate moment with your partner? All of that plays into breath work. So being conscious of the breath, noticing the breath as you intake and filling your lungs, and as you exhale as it leaves your lungs. So becoming aware of that, being present with it, I think is the most important thing.
Just real quickly, going back to what you said about the lungs, I'm just in shock that you said the Chinese medicine symbol for lungs, or for grief.
Yes, it's for grief. So the lungs, all in a Chinese medicine, all organs are related to emotions, like the heart is emotions, obviously love, and then you have all the sexual organs that's related to certain type of emotions. The lungs is related to grief. Because if you really think about it, when someone really sob and cry, what happens? You tremble, right? You can't catch your breath. You hold your breath, or you breathe really heavily. You get stuck. So the lungs is the representative, the energy of the lungs is grief. And so it's not a coincidence that this virus affects our lungs, because we've been grieving for a long time, as collective, as this human race in this 3D dimension world. So many things have happened, especially in our country, that we haven't dealt with for the last 250 odd years. If you really think about it, our country is a really young country in comparison to the history of the rest of the world, right? So for 250 odd years, we have not really look it in its eyes and say, hey, what's going on here? What's not working? What have we been doing the last 100 years is not working. So there's a lot of grief to relieve. And let's just go microscopic, go individual, you know? So when you come to individual and you start to feel the grief, the very first thing you feel is all this here. The heart maybe, but it's mostly the lungs that is trying to relieve, because that's what it's holding on to, is all the grief that's holding on to. So I find it really fascinating that this pandemic had to do with our lungs, and it's all about just having this opportunity to grieve.
Yeah. Where do you see the energy of this year going?
So this year, I know most people think that it's been really bad, and it has been bad. It has been really challenging for all, if not most. And we're actually just beginning with the work. This last 5 months of lockdown and quarantine time is really a quiet time, if you really think about it. Yes, our world is not quiet, our political system's not quiet, our country is not quiet, but individually it's an opportunity to really turn inwards, because this is exactly what we've been asking for. More time for ourselves, more quiet time, more time with family, more time for leisure, instead of, even though we're quarantined at home, but it's more downtime for us. So this is actually a quiet time. And what's going to happen for the last quarter of the year, I feel energetically, it's actually a uprising. It's actually coming forth. All those months of quietness, it's going to actually getting really more into action, getting more things done, and then going into the next year, into 2021, it's all about working. 2021, it's all about taking everything that we have experienced this year and putting it to work. This year has been the training ground, and next year is like getting on the training wheels and actually pedaling the tricycle. So yeah, the lights are going off again. So in reality, here's an opportunity, is that next year we are taking all the skill sets that we are learning and all the things that we have seen to really put into action. So unfortunately, it's not coming to a end per se, or it's going to be easier. It's actually going to be uphill. We're actually going uphill now. I know most people think we were going uphill the last 6 months. Not quite. That was really just the path that we were being put at the bottom of the hill, and now we're actually taking the ascent going uphill. So a lot of work involved, and that is microscopically on the individual level, and family, all the way up to nation and country and world.
Yeah. And it's an election year for us here in the States.
I know, right? And that's what the work is all about. It's leading up to the election in November. And the truth is that's actually going to lead into next year. It's going to carry on into early next year. And then maybe around March or so, we're going to really see this whole shift happening. And that we're going to actually feel the urge to take everything that we have experienced this whole entire year and put it into action.
Francine, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us and coming on. I feel like I could talk to you forever.
Me too. I love doing this. I love talking about this, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for doing the work that you do, and for seeing me whenever I need.
Well, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for you.
After my first Reiki session with you, you told me that my throat chakra needed some work, and I didn't even connect the dots. But months after that, I started this podcast. So here I am working with my throat chakra. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for being open to receiving, and thank you for the courage that you have in being on your path.
Thank you so much. Where can people find you? Your website, your Instagram, anywhere else that are viewers?
Sure. So my website is francineong.com. So it's my first name, my last name.com. My social media, the only social media I'm really kind of active on is Instagram. And you can find that on my website as well. But Instagram is soulfu_om, O-M underscore O-M. So soulfu om om.
All right, and I'll have all of that in my show notes. And you are doing remote sessions right now?
Yes, I am doing remote sessions right now. I'm also doing classes every month. We just did a full moon meditation just 2 days ago or a day ago, I think. So yes, so it's just reconnecting in a different way, but still connecting and still healing on this path. Yes.
All right, Francine, thank you again. Thank you so much. And thank you for listening to Hey Heart 143. Remember, 143 means I love you. Tell your own heart I love you. And head over to the show notes. I'll have all the links to getting in touch with Francine over there.